The other problem is the evolution of Western medicine. Patients have to understand that medicine is a business. And the number one rule of any business is don't lose a customer, right? And so when you look at this from a business standpoint and not kind of an altruistic, what's best for the patient, but from an economic model, this system is a beautiful financial model. It's $1 trillion global industry every year. And so I think I don't blame the doctors. I taught in medical school. I was in academia for 20 something years. So I know how the system works. And we've tried to change it, and there's so much resistance and so much big money and forces that are resistance to change because the change impedes upon the economic model of medicine. There is no money in curing disease. There's money in treating disease, and that's the model. So these doctors don't worry about root cause. And then the problem for doctors is they've got to see a certain number of patients every day to pay the bills, keep the lights on, pay their malpractice, and to insurance to reimburse them. And the pay model is you've got to make a diagnosis to get to an ICD-10 code to get reimbursed. Then once you make a diagnosis, there's only finite solutions, a number of solutions, therapeutic solutions you can prescribe for them. Or you're practicing medicine outside the standard of care and they're putting their license on the line.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're completely handcuffed. And I don't blame the doctors, it's the system. Well, nitric oxide is a gas. It's a signaling molecule that's produced naturally in the lining of the blood vessels. In fact, most cell types, but it's the molecule that controls tissue oxygenation, blood flow, circulation, mobilization of stem cells, preventing our telomeres from getting shorter to prevent early demise, and it activates our own mitochondria. So it makes more mitochondria per cell and makes those mitochondria generate more cellular energy more efficiently. So everything we know about chronic disease, and there's really 4 hallmarks of every single chronic disease, and it's low blood flow, or what we call hypoxia or ischemia. It's inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction. And when you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, that sets the stage for all these hallmarks of chronic disease. And if you can restore the production of nitric oxide, you basically restore blood flow, you reduce inflammation, inhibit oxidative stress, and mitigate the immune dysfunction that we see in chronic disease.
That perhaps Alzheimer's, Parkinson's could live in the gut for 10, 15, 20 years before they make it to the brain. So how much of that, if any of it, has to do with what we eat, and maybe a combination of that and fluoride in the water, fluoride in the toothpaste, mouthwash, antacids? Are we looking at this toxic soup, basically, that disrupts the gut biome and then it makes it to the brain?
Absolutely. The GI tract and the gut microbiome is called your second brain, because there's a clear communication between that. But look, if I wanted to make you chronically ill, I would get your cholesterol below 200. I would follow the government's food pyramid. I would put you on antacids. I would fluorinate the water. I would fluorinate your toothpaste. And what is that?
It sounds like what's happening every day.
That's the standard American.
That's what's happening. All the doctors are doing it.
And I would put herbicides and pesticides on all the food we eat so that it completely destroys the gut microbiome.
Oh, now we're in reality. Sorry, folks.
This is life. This is reality.
This is the way it is.
The sci-fi film. I mean, we've been doing this for 100 years, and look at the consequences of this. We've got the sickest people on the face of the planet.
Are they really?
I think the loss of nitric oxide production precedes mitochondrial dysfunction. So we talk about aging, and you look at kind of what aging is. Aging to me is the inability to repair and replace cells that work properly. Because we're constantly wearing our cells out. We just got to repair and replace with stem cells. We mobilize our stem cells. We repair and replace dysfunctional cells with active mitochondria, get rid of the senescent cells, and we don't age. And we can improve health span, improve longevity. So nitric oxide is what is the signal that tells our own stem cells to mobilize and differentiate. So we never run out of stem cells. We really lose the ability to mobilize our own stem cells because we lose the ability to produce the molecule, nitric oxide, that tells our stem cells to mobilize, repair and replace, differentiate into different cell types.
We are with Dr. Nathan Bryan, and I'm so excited you're here with me. Thanks, Dr. Bryan. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Karl. Great to see you. Great to be with you.
Well, great to have you here. I've been following you for quite a time here, and I've learned so much. And having you join me and sharing with our audiences in Nashville and Syracuse, I just couldn't be more grateful appreciate you and all the work you're doing.
Well, thanks very much. We've been working hard for a lot of years.
Well, yeah. So I have to tell you, I've heard some about the importance of nitric oxide in relation to our health span within our lifespan, and our longevity. And I have to say, until I came upon you quite a while back, I didn't know that much. And now I'm learning. I'm like, man, this is serious stuff. So I was wondering, doctor, if you would mind maybe explaining what is importance? What's all this stuff about nitric oxide in relation to our overall human health?
Well, nitric oxide is a gas. It's a signaling molecule that's produced naturally in the lining of the blood vessels. In fact, most cell types, but it's the molecule that controls tissue oxygenation, blood flow, circulation, mobilization of stem cells, preventing our telomeres from getting shorter to prevent early demise, and it activates our own mitochondria. So it makes more mitochondria per cell and makes those mitochondria generate more cellular energy more efficiently. So everything we know about chronic disease, and there's really 4 hallmarks of every single chronic disease, and it's low blood flow, or what we call hypoxia or ischemia. It's inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction. And when you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, that sets the stage for all these hallmarks of chronic disease. And if you can restore the production of nitric oxide, you basically restore blood flow, you reduce inflammation, inhibit oxidative stress, and mitigate the immune dysfunction that we see in chronic disease. And we mobilize stem cells to repair and replace dysfunctional cells. So when you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, that functional loss of nitric oxide precedes all these structural changes and symptoms and disease processes by many years. So I think it's critically important for people to understand, number one, what nitric oxide is and how well their body may be producing it. Because if you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, you're on a very slippery slope to development of chronic disease.
Man. So, one of the words that seems to be a buzzword, especially the past year or two, is mitochondria. In fact, I was talking with, you might know a couple of people, Thomas Seyfried, Boston College, Luisa Nicola, Marty McCary, Casey Means, is all mitochondria. And I sort of, in what I do as a practitioner, I know about mitochondria, but I didn't know this much until the past couple of years, especially this year. And that this is the power pack of every cell, right? We want to have healthy mitochondria. We want to have total function of it. There are several people, experts like Seyfried and others, saying cancer is more of a mitochondrial dysfunction or related to it, possibly more often than being genetic. Sure. And I find it really, really interesting, and it always seems like we're coming back to things like blood flow, inflammation, getting oxygen to all the areas of the body. And so I want to continue, though. So as far as nitric oxide goes, I want to get more in depth with this, but not before I ask you, how did you get interested in this? Because you're one of the few who are talking about it, and of all the people I know of talking about it, you're the only one going into deep detail, and I appreciate it.
Well, this is all I've done for 25, going on 30 years now. I got a degree in biochemistry from the University of Texas here in Austin. I'm a small town country boy in Texas, and then from there I went to LSU School of Medicine, and it was there where I learned about nitric oxide. A Nobel Prize had just been awarded for the discovery of nitric oxide, and Lou Ignarro, fortunately, who just won the Nobel Prize, came and spoke before our student body at LSU and talked about the discovery of this molecule, nitric oxide. I became interested in it, and I trained under a pharmacologist, got a PhD in molecular and cellular physiology. And really, my PhD work was on developing analytical methods to detect, nanomolar and femtomolar concentrations of nitric oxide that are, produced in the lining of the blood vessel, and try to figure out, okay, once nitric oxide is produced, where does it go, what does it become, and what does it do? And then can we develop methods to determine nitric oxide metabolites in different disease processes and figure out what exactly going on, create a fingerprint of endobiology in different diseases. And then more importantly, how does the human body make nitric oxide? What goes wrong in people that can't make it? And then how do we correct that?
Yeah.
And so that's where it all started in the early 2000s at LSU School of Medicine. Then from there, I went and did a fellowship in cardiology and vascular biology at Boston Medical Center.
Wow.
Spent 2.5 years there as a postdoc. And then I was recruited by the other gentleman who won the Nobel Prize, Fran Murad, and I had my first faculty position as a professor of molecular medicine at UT Medical School in Houston. And it was there I just continued on the research, and we figured out ways to make nitric oxide gas and to restore the function of the NOS enzyme, and then made discoveries on the oral microbiome. Because I knew early on, well, I didn't know, I thought early on, as we progressed the science, I became very confident that we could solve a lot of issues related to not only the treatment, curing, but the prevention of chronic disease. And so really the holy grail in what we were doing in basic science was, how do we restore the production of this naturally produced molecule and understand what goes wrong in people that have lost the ability to make it? How do we correct that? And then how do we restore the production of this molecule? Because now, as we progress, and really over the past 15 years, I became convinced that if we could create a way to restore the production of nitric oxide and signaling within the human body, we would change the world. We would certainly change the world of healthcare and how we treat patients for the next 100 years.
Yeah, I'm really interested in knowing more about that. With that said, what would be some common signs, let's say, of nitric oxide deficiency in the body? How would we get? What's the first sign, if there's any?
Yeah, usually the first sign and symptoms, again, understanding that nitric oxide is a vasodilator, so it dilates blood vessels and regulates blood flow to every organ, tissue, and cell in the body upon demand. So the first sign and symptom of nitric oxide deficiency is erectile dysfunction. Because you got to understand, when we're stimulated and we're about to be intimate, then we have to dilate the blood vessels of the sex organs to allow for the engorgement, to allow for the increase in blood flow. But if the cells of the penis or the clitoris or the labia can't dilate to get the engorgement to increase blood flow, then that's sexual dysfunction. It's erectile dysfunction in men and women. This isn't just a male disease. And for women to have an orgasm, you get an increase in interlabial pressure, interclitoral pressure, and that increase in pressure comes from the increase in blood flow. An increase in blood flow comes from the production of nitric oxide. So all this stems back to the ability of the cells in the lining of the blood vessels to produce nitric oxide, dilate the blood vessels, and regulate blood flow. So when we lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, ED is the first sign and symptom. And then if not corrected, but this is a systemic disease, Ben, because if you have endothelial dysfunction in that vascular bed, you get endothelial dysfunction in the coronary arteries, the cerebral arteries, it's systemic disease. Then you see an increase in blood pressure, you get exercise intolerance, mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, metabolic disease, the list continues.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, and the ED commercials around every day, every hour, everywhere, it seems, So sadly, it's no surprise that there's probably a nitric oxide deficiency epidemic of sorts going on. With that said, folks, I appreciate you listening to Your Health Matters. We are with Dr. Nathan Bryan. And for me, this is just probably my most anticipated interview I've ever done. I've really been looking forward to meeting you. So thank you, Doctor. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be back after this short break. All right, we're back with Dr. Nathan Bryan talking about nitric oxide, something that's not really talked about enough, in my opinion, and that's why we're bringing you Dr. Nathan Bryan today, because he is educating about this like nobody else I've ever heard of. So let's see, we talked about ED, we talked about, let's talk about this. How about nitric oxide as far as how can we produce more? And this plays a role in athletic performance recovery, doesn't it?
For sure.
Yeah. So let's go down that road for a minute.
Yeah, so since the late 90s, when nitric oxide was discovered to be a vasodilator and an inducer of mitochondrial biogenesis and enhancer of mitochondrial function, athletes caught on to this. In fact, the early nitric oxide products that hit the market were for athletes, kind of the well-trained athletes, the bodybuilders who want vascularity, increased pump, and all that. But now we know that your ability to produce nitric oxide predicts your exercise capacity. And there's acute effects and there's a chronic adaptive effects. The acute effects are you're just increasing blood flow and oxygen delivery and making the mitochondria more efficient, right? So you can produce more cellular energy with less oxygen. So what that means is you improve your anaerobic threshold and you get less lactic acid buildup and you recover faster. Now, if you can maintain normal nitric oxide production or you take a nitric oxide booster that actually produces nitric oxide, then that induces mitochondrial biogenesis. So the net of that is now you have more mitochondria per cell generating more cellular energy with less oxygen. And that's what defines an elite athlete. And that's how the really well-trained athletes help compete the competition.
Sure. So you mentioned, are there supplements for this? Or let's go back. Is there a way to produce it naturally ourselves or through diet? Is there a way to produce it additional if you need it, maybe a supplement or anything like that?
Sure. Now, what we always try to do, and with my training in biochemistry and molecular and cellular physiology, our objective in the basic sciences was to understand the mechanism of disease to the extent that we could fix it and really address the root cause of every single chronic disease. So nitric oxide is naturally produced. We understand what goes wrong in people that can't make it. So what we do is we start with diet and lifestyle. And so I tell people the science is pretty complex and complicated, but the solution is pretty simple. Just stop doing the things that are disrupting nitric oxide production, and then start doing the things that have been clinically and scientifically proven to restore and recapitulate nitric oxide production and signal. So we can kind of unwrap that. So number one, we found that if you're using mouthwash, there's a role of the oral microbiome in producing nitric oxide. And 2 out of 3 Americans use mouthwash every day, and 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. And we and others have published on this that it's not coincidental, it's causal.
A lot of people are upset about that too, but it is what it is.
And
I'm sure you've heard it from people, yeah.
And fluoride in your toothpaste. You got to get rid of fluoride. It's not only an antiseptic, it's a neurotoxin, and it shuts down your thyroid function. So get rid of fluoride, get rid of mouthwash. And then the other major contributor to nitric oxide deficiency are antacids. The proton pump inhibitor.
Sure.
Now you don't even have to have a prescription for it. You can go to the corner drugstore and buy Prevacid, Prilosec, Nexium, omeprazole over the counter. And this is killing people. It's completely shutting down nitric oxide production, causing increase in heart attacks, strokes, and Alzheimer's. So those are the 3 biggies. If you get rid of fluoride in your drinking water and in your toothpaste, stop using mouthwash, wean off your antacids. Now you just throw in some more green leafy vegetables, moderate physical exercise, get 20, 30 minutes of sunlight early in the morning. And now your body's primed to do what it's designed to do. We just got to get out of the way. The body's a lot smarter than we are. We just got to get out of the way.
Okay, so green leafy vegetables. And, okay, let's go back for a minute. So you mentioned Alzheimer's more than once, and I'm just surmising in my head that there's, let's talk about aging too, because through the aging process, from what little I know about this, it looks like we start to produce less and less of this. We have to be mindful of producing it intentionally, maybe, really taking care of our diet, and whatever else. But how can we trace it to Alzheimer's? I'm just curious to know if there's a particular scientific way or pathway to trace shortage of nitric oxide to Alzheimer's.
Absolutely. The mechanism is clearly defined, and the root cause of Alzheimer's has been completely elucidated. So Alzheimer's is not a mystery anymore. So it's a progression of disease. You start with what we call mild cognitive impairment, where you start to get forgetful. And then, if not corrected, you develop what's called vascular dementia. And it's a vascular problem. And then Alzheimer's is a metabolic disease. It's insulin resistance and focal ischemia in the brain. So let's trace that back to the early. So you can pick this up through imaging, whether it's functional MRIs of the brain or whether it's SPECT scans of the brain. And you take a patient who has mild cognitive disorders or mild cognitive impairment, and they have reduced blood flow to certain regions of the brain. So that tells us that it's a vascular problem. And again, it goes back. What are the risk factors for Alzheimer's? High blood pressure, diabetes, erectile dysfunction, certain drug therapy, cholesterol-lowering medications, antacids. All of those are disrupting nitric oxide production, losing the regulation of blood flow to the brain. And then the other thing, the brain is typically fuels itself on sugar. And so Alzheimer's has been considered diabetes type 3. You develop insulin resistance and you can't get glucose into the cell. Well, we published in 2009 that nitric oxide is part of the insulin signaling and glucose uptake pathway. So number one, if you can't make nitric oxide, you can't dilate the blood vessels of the cerebral arteries. So you get focal ischemia and hypoxia. You develop insulin resistance. You can't get glucose into the cell. Then you can't get nutrients into the cell. You can't take out the metabolic waste product. You get protein misfolding, buildup of amyloid, buildup of tau, and what do you got? That's called Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
But if we can just restore blood flow or prevent the loss of nitric oxide, you maintain insulin signaling, you maintain glucose uptake, you maintain normal cerebral blood flow, and you can completely prevent, reverse, and cure Alzheimer's. And we've got drug programs now that we're developing drugs specifically for Alzheimer's. And I truly believe that it will completely eradicate Alzheimer's in the future. In the next 10 years, Alzheimer's will not be an issue.
Yeah. That's amazing. So that gets me thinking about something. So when we look at, I'm just going to just rattle off here some things that I've talked about in the past and with other people learned or read or whatever, or what are told to me. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
For example, that perhaps Alzheimer's, Parkinson's could live in the gut for 10, 15, 20 years before they make it to the brain. So how much of that, if any of it, has to do with what we eat and maybe a combination of that and fluoride in the water, fluoride in the toothpaste, mouthwash, antacids? Are we looking at this toxic soup, basically, that disrupts the gut biome and then it makes it to the brain?
Absolutely. The GI tract and the gut microbiome is called your second brain, because there's a clear communication between that. But look, if I wanted to make you chronically ill, I would get your cholesterol below 200. I would follow the government's food pyramid. I would put you on antacids. I would fluorinate the water. I would fluorinate your toothpaste. And what is that?
It sounds like what's happening every day.
That's the standard American.
That's what's happening. All the doctors are doing it.
And I would put herbicides and pesticides on all the food we eat so that it completely destroys the gut microbiome.
Oh, now we're in reality. Sorry, folks.
This is life. This is reality.
This is the way it is.
It's a sci-fi film. I mean, we've been doing this for 100 years, and look at the consequences of this. We've got the sickest people on the face of the planet.
Yeah.
So it's all connected. But what this is the food we eat today is depleted of nutrients. It's got poison in us, and we're over medicated. We're constantly bombarded with toxins, so we're nutrient deficient. We're burdened with toxins. We shut down nitric oxide production. We have dysbiosis. It leads to chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction, and the rapid onset of disease. And some people it just manifests first in the brain, and others it's liver disease, kidney disease, heart disease.
Yeah, man, you just said so much in just the past few minutes. This is just. I'm going to be back, going back and listening to this a lot because I need to write it all down because it all ties in together. And wow, that's all I can say at the moment. But we do have to go out to a break. And you're listening to Your Health Matters here on the iHeart Network. We are with Dr. Nathan Bryan talking about nitric oxide. Really, really fascinating. So we'll be back after this short break. All right, we're back with Dr. Nathan Bryan. Man, that was just, that last 9 minutes there, that might have been the most filled, just jam-packed with information and how you're just tying all this in together. Like, it's helping me personally to get a better picture of what's going on. All these little parts, like a missing piece of the puzzle now coming into play. The dilator and the lack of it, we're not going to have the circulation we need, don't get the oxygen we need, disease manifests. And also, of course, what you said, which is sad, but it's true, is everywhere. Fluoride here, fluoride there, pesticides, paraquat, one of the only countries that allows it is us, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. So we talked about lifestyle changes. Any additional lifestyle changes, like if we add exercise into the equation. Now let's talk about a couple types of exercise. Let's just say on a basic level, you do some resistance training. Okay, great. Building muscle, we need to have that. What about cardiovascular? And how does nitric oxide play a role in helping us perform better? We talked about athletes a little, but also just how does that fit into this puzzle of living longer health span in our lifespan? Exercise and nitric oxide and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, exercise is medicine, and the reason exercise is medicine is because it stimulates and activates the production of nitric oxide. So when we start to exercise, and whether it's resistance training or cardiovascular. But most of the published clinical data on activation of nitric oxide comes from just cardiovascular exercise. So increasing heart rate, increasing breath rate. So what that does when we start to exercise is it's creating a little bit of shear stress in the lining of the blood vessel. And that activates nitric oxide production. It tells our body, hey, we need to dilate the blood vessels to allow for this increase in heart rate and pressure. So we can dilate the blood vessels, reduce pressure, and also dilate the coronary arteries so we can increase the blood flow to meet the increased metabolic demands on the heart. So then to make nitric oxide by the enzyme nitric oxide synthase, we need oxygen. So as long as you can deliver adequate oxygen, then nitric oxide is continually produced. But when you run out of oxygen, we call that the anaerobic threshold, then nitric oxide production shuts down, and then we start to get in the anaerobic lactic acid buildup, and that's when people tire and fatigue and they have poor recovery. So that's the acute effects of how nitric oxide stimulates that. And so this is called ischemic preconditioning. So there are brief periods of ischemia or hypoxia, and then that signals these adaptive changes. So it increases angiogenesis, increases mitochondrial biogenesis, because the body sees that acute episode of ischemia or hypoxia and go, I don't want to do that again, so I need to create more blood vessels, more mitochondria, to more efficiently utilize the oxygen I have to make energy so I don't run out of energy. And those are the adaptive effects, and the cell signaling pathways have been completely elucidated, activation of PGC1 alpha, mitochondrial biogenesis. So all that is very well worked out in the scientific literature and the biochemical pathways to do that.
So you got my brain going here. I'm thinking about different things. For example, exercise, cardiovascular, and I was thinking about mitochondria. So if you have insufficient nitric oxide, does it mean you'll also definitely have or possibly have mitochondrial dysfunction?
For sure.
Are they really?
I think the loss of nitric oxide production precedes mitochondrial dysfunction. So we talk about aging, and you look at kind of what aging is. Aging to me is the inability to repair and replace cells that work properly. Because we're constantly wearing ourselves out. We just got to repair and replace with stem cells. We mobilize our stem cells, we repair and replace dysfunctional cells with active mitochondria, get rid of the senescent cells, and we don't age, and we can improve health span, improve longevity. So nitric oxide is the signal that tells our own stem cells to mobilize and differentiate. So we never run out of stem cells. We really lose the ability to mobilize our own stem cells because we lose the ability to produce the molecule, nitric oxide, that tells our stem cells to mobilize, repair and replace, differentiate into different cell types. So that's really the holy grail of aging, and this unified theory of aging is nitric oxide, because nitric oxide activates the telomerase enzyme, prevents telomeres from shortening, mobilizes our stem cells, and induces mitochondrial biogenesis and improves energy production from the mitochondria that exist in every cell in the body.
Well, I want all I can get so I can get younger.
I think that's the objective.
Or not age as quickly.
Yeah, not age as quickly. Look, we're certainly not immortal beings, but I certainly believe that we can improve and lengthen our health span and lifespan just based on what we're being able to integrate into the basic science and being able to translate that into clinical medicine.
Sure. So I was watching this documentary that a lot of people are probably familiar with, Blue Zones. And for some reason, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he's coming on the show next spring, the creator of it. Anyways.
And I can't remember his name.
Yeah, I can't remember his name. But anyways, if anyone's ever watched Blue Zones, what they're doing is this gentleman, Dan
Buettner.
Yes, Buettner or Bettner or something. Yes, yeah, Dan. I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but now I remember. So Dan is actually out traveling right now, and we're in October of 2024 at the moment, but he's out for a few months finishing a book, but he's traveling and back in more Blue Zones. These people tend to eat a diet that's not full of junk, crap, and processed foods. Their alcohol limit intake is limited, if any. But they're also moving. I mean, these are like centenarians. They're going 100 and beyond in a lot of places, or at least into their late 80s, 90s, and that's considered kind of young. There are people in 110, 115, 117 years old in the documentary, and one thing I see in common is, well, what they point out in the documentary. They're moving, they're active in community, they're socializing, they're using their brain, and they're eating well. So I would just assume they probably have enough, they're producing nitric oxide through lifestyle that's probably helping them to live that long. Would that be a safe assumption?
Yeah, and I think they don't have doctors over medicating them too. That contributes to.
I'm sorry to laugh.
They probably have
funny, but
community shaman that gives them natural remedies, but they're certainly not medicated like most Americans. Most Americans over the age of 50 or 60 are on 10, 12, 15, 20 different medications. I mean, how in the hell can the body even?
I'm on 3. I don't want to be on 3. Well, you got me thinking about my thyroid too, because for 20 years or so I've been taking, levothyroxine, and I'm thinking, geez, it's the second to lowest dose, but still, maybe if I make some more changes, I can get off of that.
But look, to understand thyroid function, you've got to have iodine. I mean, iodine's required. Most Americans aren't getting enough iodine in their diet because where does iodine come from? Seaweed. Most Americans aren't eating seaweed, and then we're over-fluorinated. If you remember from the periodic table, iodine and fluoride are on the same column of the periodic table. So people who have too much fluoride and not enough iodine develop hypothyroidism, because it's not that you're deficient in T4, you've lost the ability to convert T4 to T3.
Wow. That right there, I'd like to continue on that. We're going to go out to a break in a few seconds, folks. We're talking with Dr. Nathan Bryan today. This is really fascinating. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes. You're listening to Your Health Matters. We're on the iHeart Network, and appreciate everybody listening so much. We've been so lucky to have some wonderful guests, and Dr. Nathan Bryan is among the top of the list. Man, this is amazing. I appreciate this so much. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes. Okay, we're back with Dr. Nathan Bryan. Okay, let's go back. Where did we just leave off? We were talking about the aging population. Hypothyroidism. Okay, that's me. That's so many people I know. Sometimes you get overactive thyroid. I don't know what that's about, but I know a lot of people are on Synthroid or some generic. Mm-hmm. Can you go a little more into detail on that? So we're talking iodine, and other things. What can we do to the thyroid that might be better than taking a pill? And by the way, folks, I'm not saying stop your medicine. I am not a doctor. I'm not an MD. I'm just a guy who likes to learn and share. So you might want to talk with your doctor. Then again, if you do, the doctor probably won't know any of this stuff, so you might want to find a new doctor. That's up to you. But anyways, Dr. Bryan, please.
I use that line all the time. Look, if you keep having to go back to your doctor, you got to fire your doctor. You wouldn't take your car to the same mechanic and your car's still breaking down. It's the same principles apply to medicine.
100%.
Thyroid's a hormone, right? And your body has to communicate. It's got to sense the levels of thyroid hormone, that it activates your thyroid stimulating hormone to reduce T4. T4 has to be converted to T3 and T2. T4 is completely inactive, right? T3 and T2 are your active hormones. And you need iodine in order to convert T4 to T3 or Synthroid thyroidoxin into active hormone. And 95% of Americans don't have sufficient iodine. And so just simply supplementing iodine, that may be enough to kickstart your conversion of T4 to T3 and then get your thyroid working again, and just eliminate fluoride. So too much fluoride, not enough iodide, leads to hypothyroidism. And then all these people on antacids, you need acid to absorb iodine in the diet. You need acid to absorb selenium, chromium, B vitamins, iron. So everybody taking antacids is nutrient deficient and will develop hypothyroidism.
Wow.
So we just measuring and labs mean nothing. It always makes me angry when people go, oh, my TSH, T4, T3, it's in the normal range. And you started this broadcast out. If that's normal, I don't want to be normal, right? I want to be optimal. So normal is not normal. And so the best measure of your thyroid function is to take your temperature as soon as you open your eyes in the morning, because thyroid sets your basal metabolic rate. And if your temperature is below 98, I don't give a damn what your labs say, your thyroid isn't working. Then you can titrate in these different things and see if your blood pressure, if your temperature can get up to 98.6 or at least in the range of 98, then you can titrate on your iodine, your medication, your lifestyle changes, and basically self-medicate. And most of your doctors aren't going to know this, especially your endocrinologist to treat thyroid disease.
Wow, that's another load of information there. That's really interesting. So first thing I'm thinking is my temperature is always about 97.3, period.
They'll tell you your labs are normal, right?
Right. And then, so there's another conversation. And folks, if you've been listening, you heard me talk about this recently, how it drives me crazy that the normal ranges these days are different than what normal was 30, 40, 50 years ago. They've adjusted the norm because norm has changed, but it doesn't mean that it's healthy. And like you said, you used the exact word that I've said before is I want optimal. I don't want normal, because normal these days ain't so good, usually, in a lot of cases, right? So optimal, what was it, back 50 years ago? Well, maybe
it was a much wider range. Yeah, so what they define normal is, look, it's a bell curve. And so when you got two standard deviations from inside of either the extremes, and that's what they call normal. But as I look around, when I travel all around the U.S. and all around the world, and I look around and see 95% of the people around me, I do not want to be like them. They're overweight. They got high blood pressure. They got metabolic disease, ED. They're diabetic. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in signing up for that program.
No, this is everywhere too. I mean, folks listening, I know you've heard this before. You're going to hear it again, and you're going to hear it again and again, because we're going to keep talking about this, because this is almost a crisis, I would say. And we look at, I forget who I heard this from, but somewhere in, by the year 2050, I mean, if anyone's alive, I'm saying that facetiously, but if anyone's healthy, that would be great. But predictions for Alzheimer's, cases of Alzheimer's by 2030, 2040, 2050 are through the roof. This is if we don't change. And then we're looking at bankrupting. I mean, it'd be like a medical bankruptcy for society, because we can't handle this. We can't keep living this way and then expect to live long and healthy lives without a lot of to live long and live healthy. You might live long and be unhealthy. A lot of people are unhealthy for so many decades.
That's right.
Constant medication. You get 20 pills in the morning, 20 pills at night. No exaggeration. So I'm starting to go off on a rant, but it's because that's why I have people on the show who know way more than I do. I want the best world-class people on this show, and you're one of them, Dr. Bryan, who's really just telling it like it is. Plus, you have a really nice way of delivering. I love listening to you.
It's an evolution. I spent, I guess, 12 years in education outside of high school, between college and 3.5 years at LSU School of Medicine, and training, postdoc training, and all that. So, but you learn these things, and then just being in the world and going to medical conferences and speaking, but more importantly, learning. There's a reason we have 2 ears and one mouth, right? We need to listen twice as much as we talk, and I've tried to implement that in practices and learn these things. I think the beauty and kind of the unique perspective of having a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and a PhD in molecular and cellular physiology really allows one to integrate these different fields of medicine. And basic science is now so siloed, and medicine is so siloed. The cardiologist doesn't talk to the neurologist, and the dentist doesn't talk to the physicians, and forget the body's connected. We have to be able to integrate these systems and really understand the root cause of disease and address the root cause. And that has to change. We can do better.
Yeah, it really does have to change. So with that said, we're coming to near the end of the hour. That's the bad news. The good news is we're going to go to overtime. And if you listened before, you know that overtime is at karlsterling.net. So that's Karl with a K, karlsterling.net. Go there, and it'll take you right over to the YouTube playlist. Look for the episode with the title and Dr. Bryan's picture here, Dr. Nathan Bryan. We'll probably have the words nitric oxide in the title because it's so relevant and important. But before we close out here, let's say another 90 seconds or so, Doctor, for those listening right now, do you have a takeaway message? And then remember, folks, we're going to overtime, karlsterling.net, Karl with a K. Any takeaway message or words of wisdom in that regard?
Yeah, look, I think, nitric oxide is foundational for optimal health and disease prevention. I think there's over 200,000 papers published in scientific literature on nitric oxide. So it's absolutely essential. If you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, then I think you need to start considering nitric oxide as maybe a contributor to your illness or your condition. and just understand what are you doing that's disrupting the natural production of nitric oxide. We've talked about that. And then just start employing these simple diet and lifestyle changes, and you'll see your health transform right before you. And as we advance the science and, get drugs approved and on the market, then we can hopefully have safe and effective drugs for you. But we don't have to do that. I think just simply diet and lifestyle changes can get you there.
Yeah, those are great words, wisdom right there, Doctor. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Your information is just priceless. You can't put a price on this stuff. It's so relevant, so important. Remember, folks, we're going to overtime right now. KarlSterling.net, that's Karl with a K, and learn more from the amazing Dr. Nathan Bryan. You're amazing. You're changing the world. Thank you, Doctor, and we'll see you on the other side for overtime, folks. This is Your Health Matters on iHeart Network. See you next week. Okay. All right, folks, this is Your Health Matters. This is the overtime portion of my interview with Dr. Nathan Bryan, and this has been so fascinating. I don't say that all that often, but this one here, this is such great information. So, why is it? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear from you. Why is it that the medical world, first of all, we know they don't communicate with each other, the specialists, and everybody's, 5 different specialists. Like if they're diagnosed, my mouth isn't working right. If they're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, that statistically they're going to have like 4 other, on average, maybe comorbidities, so they call them. So you need 4 more specialists, and then there's 5 people involved, and none of them talk to each other. It's because they want to shift we'll go over there and check that, but they want to talk to each other. But how did we get here? Like, it just seems like all this stuff should be no-brainer stuff, and maybe it's irrelevant how we get here, but to me, I'm fascinated, like, how do we get here, but what do we do? Besides educating like we are, conversations with our doctors, they look at me like I have 3 heads if I bring it up to certain doctors. What are you talking about? The statins are the thing. Take one.
Yeah. You want to die?
What do we do?
Yeah. No, look, I think there's a number of contributing factors to this of how we got here. And, number one, we know that on average, it takes about 17 years for new discoveries to become called standard of care or some awareness around it. We're certainly past that. We're 26 years this year past the Nobel Prize. Actually, early this week, the Nobel Prizes were announced. So we're 26 years from the Nobel Prize for nitric oxide. The other problem is the evolution of Western medicine. Patients have to understand that medicine is a business, and the number one rule of any business is don't lose a customer. Right. And so when you look at this from a business standpoint and not kind of an altruistic, what's best for the patient, but from an economic model, this system is a beautiful financial model. Mm-hmm. It's $1 trillion global industry every year. And so I think I don't blame the doctors. I taught in medical school. I was in academia for 20 something years. So I know how the system works, and we've tried to change it. And there's so much resistance and so much big money and forces that are resistance to change because the change impedes upon the economic model of medicine. There is no money in curing disease. There's money in treating disease. And that's the model. So these doctors don't worry about root cause. And then the problem for doctors is they've got to see a certain number of patients every day to pay the bills, keep the lights on, pay their malpractice, and to insurance to reimburse them. And the pay model is you got to make a diagnosis to an ICD-10 code to get reimbursed. Then once you make a diagnosis, there's only finite solutions, a number of solutions, therapeutic solutions you can prescribe for them. Or you're practicing medicine outside the standard of care and they're putting their license on the line.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're completely handcuffed. And I don't blame the doctors, it's the system. But look, the question is, what do we do? We wait for the system to implode upon itself, and it will because it's not sustainable. It's breaking the world economy. And so we have to figure it out. And I think this is the way we do it. We don't educate physicians in medical school. We educate the patient and empower the patient, give them the information so they can take control of their own health, try to get off medication, talk to their doctor about weaning off medicines, change your diet, change your lifestyle, make these simple biohacks, and really empower them to the way. Hopefully, my goal is to get the information out there because in the basic sciences, we know the mechanism of every single chronic disease on the face of the earth. We know the mechanism. Now we just have to disseminate that information and put it in the hands of the patient. So my goal would be to give people all around the world the information, knowledge they need to where they never have to see a physician again. Obviously, surgeons, we're always going to need trauma, we're always going to need emergency room physicians, but specialists, family practice docs, cardiologists, gerontologists, I want them to be completely, out of business in 50 years. Because if we do what we're supposed to do and get the proper information in the hands of the people, you should never have to see a physician unless there's an accident.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because just some of the people I know, Dale Bredesen, Ray Dorsey at U of R, and so many others, I think are similar mindset to you in that so much of what we're dealing with right now, whether it's cancers, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, it's preventable, largely preventable.
For sure.
I know there's a genetic factor to some degree, but in talking with Thomas Seyfried, he says cancer is seldom genetic in his research.
Genes respond to the environment. Genes respond to the environment. Genes don't cause disease unless there's an inborn error metabolism and you're born with some genetic deficiency that's formed in utero.
Sure.
It's not embryonically lethal.
I think it's refreshing to hear you say that too. Like the way you just said that is beautiful because nobody else has said that. I just never thought of it like that. That's even like the icing on the cake. Yeah.
This field of epigenetic regulations, the DNA is the blueprint, but we can turn genes on, we can turn genes off. So you can't use genetics as an excuse for your disease.
Yeah, right. Interesting. Well, let's take this down another path just for a minute. Okay. So here in the clinic that we have, it's called neuromotor training. And it started out with a lot of people coming with Parkinson's because those of you who know me, who are listening, that's what I've traveled all over the world, and I've been teaching Parkinson's disease management strategies, techniques, and this and that to help live a better life, reduce fall risk, and a whole bunch of other things. Improve cognition, retrain the brain, take advantage of neuroplastic abilities of the brain, and so on and so forth. Well, now we've gone into pretty much all movement disorders, neurological, and a lot of it, really what we see is a lot of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, MS is a little further down the list, but it's still there, and we're seeing more and more. I don't know why it is, though. Just a side note, here in Central New York, we have 4 times the average diagnosis rate of MS than anywhere else in the country. Don't know why. Maybe a lack of sunlight here, but so now what I'm getting down to is brain health. Okay, so brain health. How does nitric oxide influence brain health and cognitive function? Now, we talked about it a little bit already with, it's a very vascular organ, the brain, right? Yeah. So can we go a little deeper into that and things that might help us to prevent cognitive decline? Even though we're talking about it for a second time, can we go deeper?
Yeah, sure. So obviously we talked about the vascular effects, and we talked about nitric oxide improving glucose uptake into the cells of the brain, which is its primary energy source. The brain is made up of fats and cholesterol, so cholesterol-lowering medications is affecting neurological function. But really what we're finding is that every disease is caused by either a nutrient deficiency or an exposure to a toxin, or worse, a combination of both. And so in neurological disease, and I follow the work of Daniel Amen, who does SPECT scans, and SPECT scans tell us how well perfused. We see the focal ischemia on a SPECT scan. Yeah. So in an area where there's brain atrophy or doesn't light up on a SPECT scan, that tells us that part of the brain isn't getting any perfusion. So obviously, without oxygen, without nutrients, it can't do its job. The other problem is many neurotransmitters are derived from amino acids, right? Tyrosine and tryptophan, all these are amino acid precursors. And if we don't have stomach acid, we can't break down the proteins in our diet into amino acids. So if you do a basic amino acid profile in these patients with neurological dysfunction, many times you'll find them deficient in basic amino acids, some of the 20 essential amino acids. The other thing in Parkinson's specifically is heavy metals. Heavy metals like lead and mercury and cadmium, those are
big ones.
Yeah, so these are neurotoxins. So if you eliminate the toxicity, you restore the good nutrients and replete the amino acids and the diet and restore stomach acid production, restore nitric oxide. Now we're perfusing the brain. We're delivering amino acids. We're restoring the function of the neurotransmitters. We're improving glucose uptake, getting glucose into the brain. We're allowing this action potential that we see in neurons because you have enough sodium, potassium, and oxygen being delivered and mitochondrial function. You completely overcome that. But this takes a little bit more deep diving of personalized precision medicine. Is what is this person exposed to? What's his toxicity burden? Heavy metals, infected root canals, dental infection, dysbiosis. And then what are his nutrient deficiencies? Do micronutrient analysis, get back to the body what's missing, eliminate from the body what's toxic. Body heals itself.
Yeah, that's interesting. It just makes me think of a friend of mine in northern England. I went up to see on one of my trips there to teach. My friend Ian, he had a hard time getting a diagnosis of Parkinson's. But once he finally found a neurologist who would actually diagnose him properly, I should say, the proper diagnosis, he had just so many mercury fillings, and the mercury, once he got them removed, actually his symptoms got better, but he still has Parkinson's. When you think about, I'm 63, so I had mercury at one time. They're all gone now. They've been replaced, but that seems like that could be a pretty big deal, going into the gums and then your circulation right up to the brain.
Yeah, every time you chew, you got mercury amalgam fillings. Every time you chew, you're releasing mercury vapors, for 10, 15, 20 years. I too, that was the norm in the 70s, right?
Sure was.
Billion. I've got all mine removed too, probably 10, 15 years ago. But what damage was done? I know people who's got, kidney failure and renal disease from mercury and early onset of Parkinsonian-like syndromes and MS due to the mercury and other toxins.
Well, let's say you get them removed and let's say you're just okay. Life is good. No diagnosis, no symptoms of anything serious anyways. What can you do to maybe delay the onset if anything was to manifest? And I'm only guessing it's diet and lifestyle probably, right? More. Well,
you can take some, there's certain chelators. You have to bind these metals and mobilize them and excrete them out. And really the only true measure of this is a urinary 24-hour urinary challenge. So you collect 24-hour urine, you do an EDTA or DTPA challenge, maybe. Okay. Then you collect 24-hour urine after that and see how much metal have you mobilized in a single chelation treatment. Because it's not about, you can't really detect this in the blood because most of these metals are stored in tissue. They're not mobile. Okay. And then the other thing is you can't really collect it in the urine and use urine because, again, if they're not mobile, if you were excreting them, that'd be a good thing because you're getting them out of the body. The problem is the toxicity is due to the lack of excretion. So the 24-hour urine challenge is a good marker or a good test for metal burden. Then you can take things like glutathione. I take a Karl and a spirulina product every day that binds metals and helps detox. You can use activated charcoal, bentonite clay, all these kind of binders and chelators that can help remove toxins from you. But, we excrete all toxins through urination, defecation, sweating, and breathing. That's our 4 main routes of exposure. And if you look, nobody sweats. You got a lot of mouth breathers who aren't getting a lot of the oxygen. And then, we have dysbiosis, constipation. People are poorly hydrated, drinking enough good water, and we don't urinate enough. So there's a buildup of toxins in the body.
Wow, that is so important. Like the way you're putting everything today just is resonating so well with me. Like I feel like you're helping me to tie together these parts that are hanging around that I know are really important, but now it's coming together in my mind. So I really appreciate that. Your delivery is helping me a lot because, like, for example, we see constipated people all the time. That's society in general, but then you get things like side effects of levodopa, carbidopa, other medications, lifestyle, lack of movement, dehydration. The next thing you know, they haven't had a bowel movement in 2 weeks, and that's no exaggeration, or 3 weeks. This could be a serious problem. So they're just storing all these toxins in us. Do you have a particular, 2 questions. For testing for nitric oxide, do you have a preferred way of doing it?
No, not really. I mean, I rely on symptoms. I developed a salivary test strip about 15 years ago. I abandoned the patents on those years ago because it was really some old chemistry that I put on a test strip. And really, I wanted these readily available, so there was really no value in patenting. But it's measuring salivary or saliva and really giving us a total body bioavailability. But the problem is people who have active oral infections, there's false positives. And I'm surprised by all the people who have active oral infection, whether they're symptomatic or asymptomatic. Oh. So I've gotten away from the test strip. So, and really my philosophy today is there's only 2 people in the world who need nitric oxide. And if you fall within one of those 2 categories, then you don't need to test. Number one, if you're sick and want to get well, you need nitric oxide. If you're well and don't want to get sick, you need nitric oxide. So if you're one of those 2 people, then why would you test? You just take it. I've been taking my nitric oxide product for 20 years. It's not because I need it. It's because I don't want to need it. Right? I don't want to lose nitric oxide production the older I get, because you and I both, we're not getting any younger chronologically. Biologically, we are. Chronologically, we're not.
Right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, so it's preventative if you're well, and it's because you need it if you're sick. So, okay, and then how about the 24-hour urine challenge? I'm having trouble talking today. I don't know why. But you collect the urine, and then you take it to a lab. Do you need a prescription to have it tested for metals?
Yeah, you'll have to go see a practitioner, and there's a lot of IV clinics around the U.S. and really around the world. But you go in, and it's a 2-day process. So they'll give you a collection device, and you'll just collect 24-hour urine. You leave there, every time you urinate, you keep it in this bottle, you take it back. And then you go in, it takes about an hour. They'll start an IV, and they'll infuse either EDTA or DTPA, depending on how these are different chelators specific for different metals. And so it takes about an hour to infuse that intravenously. And then you go home and you just collect your urine for another 24 hours, go back. Then they're going to compare the urine post-challenge, pre-challenge, and see what did we mobilize through this chelation therapy. Then that gives us an indication of what your heavy metal burden is. And then you can specifically.
So the IV is the chelator.
IV is the chelator.
Okay. And
that's meant to mobilize any stored heavy metals in your body.
So I wonder if we can do that in New York State, because New York State, where we are, is the only state that doesn't allow so many different tests. Is one of my reasons my son moved away from here. Is because as an MD, can't do half stuff he wants to do that are so revealing of so much data that would help us to live longer. But for those who don't live in New York State, and maybe for New York State, doctor, do you need a prescription for the IV thing, or how does that work?
No, you don't need a prescription for it. You can go to any clinic who does it. You know, I don't know what the regulations are specifically. In Texas, you know, we have a lot of freedoms here that aren't afforded in other states. But there are a number of IV clinics that do chelation.
Oh, that's great.
So what I do is, you know, I assume, you know, a lot of times we can test, but what I do is, because I'm on a plane every week and I'm traveling to all parts of the world, and, you know, I try to eat healthy, but, you know, sometimes it's difficult when you're on. But I anticipate that I get toxin burden. So every morning I wake up, I take, you know, usually 750 milligrams of niacin to cause lipolysis. Most toxins are stored in fat. Then I get in my infrared sauna at 170 degrees for 30 minutes. That's how I start my day. Usually 5:30 or 6 in the morning. I do my prayers and open my Hallow app and just start the day and get mentally ready for the day, and, you know, have a servant's heart and gratitude, and just focus on, okay, what was yesterday? How can I be better today? I want to be better today than I was yesterday. And I plan out my day, make a mental note of what I want to accomplish, how I'm going to do it. And then I'll take some chlorella and spirulina to bind all those toxins, and a little bit of glutathione. So no matter where I go, that's how I start my day. Because I'm limited.
There are reasons I liked you beyond your information. You're a really great guy. Seriously. I mean, the way you just put that. Seriously, how often do we hear the word gratitude from anybody? It's not that people don't have it, but you're actually articulating this.
You have to practice it. I mean, we have so much to be, and I realize that, you know, things could always be better, but also realize it could be a hell of a lot worse. So I don't take anything for granted, and I just wake up every day with gratitude that God's allowed me to live today. And
so the running joke here is I was born breech, feet first, I lived my life backwards. Once I hit the age of about 51, I started getting it together, and now I have gratitude. Instead of feeling, special and entitled.
Well, there's two dates. There's two important dates in any given person's life, right? It's the day you were born and the day you realize why you were born.
I got to tell you, it took a long time to get there. That's why I've got to live to be like 120 to make up for all the stupid things I did in the first 51 years. It's like, come on, son, we'll get it together. No, I wasn't that bad, but I wasn't that good. I'll tell you that. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go back just 1 second. I'm just curious now. The IV thing is really interesting to me. Something I think I want to look around and find and do. If somebody doesn't want to do that, or I don't know how much it costs, but if it's out of their means, is there anything you would recommend alternately as a chelating type of capsule or anything like that? I know they're out there, but I don't know if there's anything any good.
Yeah, these activated charcoal, or clay. What I use is the chlorella and the spirulina. These are, algae products. They're not that expensive. But the main thing is just avoid, pay attention to what you put in your body and on your body.
On too. Yeah, we talk about that often, and I didn't think of it today, but thanks for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, antiperspirant and deodorant, the aluminum and the metals that are in these, bath washes and all that with all the fragrance in them. And I mean, we live in a toxic world. And so you just got to pay attention to what you're putting in and on your body and the foods you eat.
Is it okay to drink coffee?
Yeah, look, I'm a coffee guy. I drink 1.5 cups of coffee every morning, and I love it. But, find you a coffee that's free of mold, that's remineralized. Most coffee's moldy. And
I really like you, Doc, because you said I can drink coffee. No, I don't mean to be silly. I really don't. I take it seriously. But I do wonder, because maybe you'll say something that maybe I shouldn't drink it, and I would listen to you. Yeah, I have at least 1.5 cups.
Yeah, no, like I enjoy that cup of coffee in the morning, but I don't drink coffee. I have my 1 cup and I'm done for the day.
Yeah.
Then I typically drink, I may have a glass of tea, but most of the time I drink, a couple liters, probably a gallon of water a day. Good, remineralized water.
And that's a big one too, because it's all this stuff, I don't want to take too much of your time, first of all, but also a lot of this, I think a lot of people may know, but if you don't know, a lot of that water out there that says it's good isn't that good. There's all kinds of stuff in it, and you've got to be really careful because that's going in your body. And so we need to take note of that. So, doctor, before we close out, just wonder if you have are there any misconceptions that you ever run into with anybody, anywhere of any kind, like medical or otherwise, misconceptions about the importance of nitric oxide? I've heard a couple, I don't know who they are, and if I did, I wouldn't say their names, say, it's not that important, but I just can't believe it's not that important. Do you ever run into this out there?
No, I do. Look, there's still those uninformed or misinformed so-called influencers who are still not, or go out there and tell people that nitric oxide is a free radical, it's toxic and damaging, and it should be avoided. And those people just, number one, they don't have the background or the training to even know. These are people who may have a high school education or a bachelor's degree in biology. So they just don't, and so they're ignorant. And ignorance is fine. Ignorance is curable. It's just a lack of information. Stupidity is something different, right? It's having the information and refusing to accept it. So I deal with ignorance. I've been in education, higher education for me, but I can't deal with stupidity. Yeah. So but if,
like they say, you can't fix stupid.
You can't fix stupid. And the deal is they think nitric oxide is a free radical, causes radical damage. It binds to cytochrome C oxidase of mitochondria, inhibits cellular respiration. And they just don't understand the basic science. Nitric oxide is a free radical. But the only way to stop a radical reaction is through interaction with another radical. And oxygen radicals are bad. Superoxide, hydroxyl radical, all those are bad radicals, free radicals. Nitric oxide, because there's a polarity between the nitrogen and the oxygen bond, and this is a lot of physical chemistry that may be over your head, or altered in, but nitric oxide donates that electron. There's a dipole moment in that molecule where it can donate an electron. And if you go back to electron or reduction oxidation chemistry, a reduction is a loss of an electron. So nitric oxide is a reducing agent. It eliminates oxidative stress. And yeah, it's a reversible inhibitor to cytochrome C oxidase. And while it's occupying that space, it allows oxygen to diffuse further into tissues to extend the oxygen gradient. So that's really the ignorance of these people who still go out there and are saying that nitric oxide should be avoided. It's not that important, and it's a toxic molecule. They're just ignorant. They're uninformed or misinformed.
Yeah, so interesting. And another theme that comes up very often lately, especially this year, is the whole role of statins, the myth about cholesterol, and all these other things that medicine.
No, I think that's the biggest myth that's ever been perpetuated in medical science. And cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease. Cholesterol causes diabetes. It causes Alzheimer's. It leads to demyelination of the sheath. It leads to brain atrophy. It disrupts the cell membrane fluidity. It leads to disruption of cell signaling, insulin resistance, diabetes. I mean, these are awful drugs. They're mitochondrial toxicants. They're causing cancer.
Yeah. We were talking with somebody a couple of weeks ago about that too, and he made it very clear, that same thing, and it's just actually refreshing to hear.
Yeah, but if you look at
expert about how,
if you look at when this pathway was discovered, the LDL receptor, and Brown and Goldstein at UT Southwestern in Dallas won the Nobel Prize for this, and statin drugs were formed to inhibit this HMA-CoA reductase enzyme. And so the American Heart Association predicted in the middle of the 80s, when these drugs were first approved, that lowering cholesterol would completely eradicate heart disease, completely eradicate cardiovascular disease. And if you look at the numbers, in a 6-year period from like 86 to 92, there were about 1,300 PCIs, which are percutaneous coronary interventions. These are stents and coronary angiograms and interventions for ischemic heart disease. About 1,300 over a 6-year period. Fast forward to 2016, 2017, there are over 3,000 in a 1-year period. We've accelerated the rate of heart disease and cardiovascular disease, and statin therapy is everywhere. We're getting everybody's cholesterol below 200, heart attacks, strokes, low T, low estrogen, low vitamin D. I mean, the worst thing I could think of as a biochemist and physiologist is to get your cholesterol below 200. It's a recipe for disaster, and we're living it. We're seeing it.
Yeah, it's everywhere, all the time. Well, I have one more question. My final question today is there any ongoing research that you are excited about in regards to nitric oxide and its application in health and longevity?
Sure. So I left academia about 10 years ago and became kind of a serial entrepreneur. And so I've licensed my patents back from the University of Texas. We've commercialized a lot of this. So my company, Bryan Therapeutics, we've got drugs now we're moving towards through the FDA for ischemic heart disease. Nitric oxide can vasodilate, regress plaque deposition in the coronary arteries. We've got a drug, as I mentioned, for Alzheimer's that I think will completely eradicate Alzheimer's disease. And then I've made a dual chamber nitric oxide topical delivery. We have that on the market now as a skincare product, but we're also developing that as a topical drug for diabetic ulcers and non-healing wounds. And we're taking 3 and 4-year-old non-healing diabetic ulcers and completely healing these wounds in a matter of weeks or months. Wow. I mean, it's the most life-changing event I've ever witnessed. And I got in this because of my dad. My dad's a paraplegic from a car accident in 1984, so I've been treating his decubitus ulcers, non-healing wounds for 40 years. Okay. And he had a 4-year-old non-healing wound, and that's when I started making a topical nitric oxide. And, within 6 months, we had this wound completely healed. When the best wound care docs and clinics all over I took him said, "You will never heal this wound," and a 70-year-old diabetic paraplegic man with a number of comorbidities. And we healed it. We killed the infection in the wound. We got blood flow to the wound. We granulated the tissue, and the wound healed. And we've repeated this over and over and over again. So that's what I'm excited about, because I know nitric oxide will change the landscape of medicine and change the world. And we're leading the way.
Can people purchase this from you or from your company? Is it prescription? How does it work?
We have a number of over-the-counter products on the market today, but the drugs are not yet approved. So anything we have on the market today is not intended to treat, prevent, cure, or mitigate any disease. But those products are at n101.com. That's the letter N, the number 1, the letter O, number 1.com. It's not n101, it's n101.com.
Got it. .com. So, yeah, I was talking with, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Audrey DeGray.
Oh, yeah, not Aubrey. I saw her a couple of weeks ago. We speak at a lot of the same conferences.
Were you in Madrid? That's where I was talking to him at, is he was in Madrid.
No, I wasn't at that event.
Interesting. Yeah. So it was fascinating to listen to him. And actually what's interesting too is here in Syracuse, New York, they have a lab. Well, in Lafayette, just south of Syracuse, they got a lab where they do all the mice stuff, which is really interesting that it's here. And he had his Dr. The guy who runs the show up here talking about drug development. Now, a lot of people are totally anti-pharma. I understand that. The big pharma has done a lot to damage us, but there is hope because there are good things out there. And Aubrey was telling me he's the first person to ever give me hope for, let's say, medicine and things that are being developed to actually help people get better and not keep them sick. And what you're saying too, I really love this. I had the Alzheimer's drug. There was a drug I was hearing about that was approved, a year or two ago. But it seems like if you take it, it causes other brain problems. Like it could be twice as bad as when you take it. So, and what good is that?
Look, I'm not a fan of big pharma either. And that's why I tell people we are not a pharmaceutical company. We do not employ principles of pharmacology or pharmaceuticals. What we do is called restorative physiology. We're giving back a critical signaling molecule that's lacking in the body. So we're never going to give the body something that's synthetic or foreign. We're giving body back something, and it's really what we call hormone replacement therapy. Nitric oxide is a hormone.
There you go.
Replace that actual molecule. So that's what we do. We're not a pharmaceutical company. We're a biotech company focused on restorative physiology.
Okay, and so I have to qualify that too, because if first of all, if I hurt your feelings in any way, because
no, not at all.
I didn't.
It's a very important distinction.
I did not intend to say that you are, or imply, I should say, that you're a big pharma. But the fact is that I can replace what I said earlier, big pharma, just say that any kind of drug, right, is just, no. And a hormone replacement therapy, I mean, this is, Marty McCary's talking about this, Aubrey de Grey's talking about it, you're talking about it. It's just, this gives me so much hope, doctor. Yeah, this gives me a lot of hope. Hope it gives all of our listeners hope too, because, well, we could sure use it. Plus the actions behind it, what's going to come forward. I'm looking forward to what happens in the future with people like you, especially your work.
No, me too. Look, it keeps me getting up and waking up every day with excitement, a purpose, and that's what drives me.
That is fantastic. Well, listen, we're going to close out now, but I just really want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for your time today, Doctor. You're doing amazing work. You're truly one of the game changers out there who is changing the world, and it's going to change a lot because of you. We need you. So keep up the great work.
We try hard. Thank you.
Well, thank you again. And to listeners, I really appreciate you listening as always. And I know I got a whole lot out of this conversation. I just can't even believe what I learned. So you're listening to Your Health Matters here on the iHeart Network. We appreciate you listening and supporting the show. Tune in again next week for another exciting episode. And remember to keep moving. Move your body and use your brain every single day. And I might add to that, maybe look for producing enough nitric oxide too. Have a good day, folks, and take care. Take it easy.